Yep. All right, good. Hey everyone, thanks for joining the webinar here. I'm Mason, here from Seattle at Noon HQ. Here's Vishal, Noon's chief nutritionist. Today we'll answer all of your questions about nutrition and hydration for endurance events, and more specifically for your next marathon. We think that if you have your hydration and nutrition dialed for your next marathon, you'll be able to achieve a PB, a PR, or whatever you're seeking out to do. So today we will answer all your questions, provide some insight. The content part of it, the slides, is going to be about 10 or 15 minutes, and Vishal will run us through that and give us some education on how we're going to use various Noon products to hydrate, how and when and why to. And then we will request that you put all of your questions in the chat, and we'll circle back to those at the end of the webinar. So I will keep an eye on the questions, and so we'll get through the content pretty quick, and then we'll have a bunch of time to do a Q&A with Vishal, and really it'll be the perfect time to ask your unique specific question, a very general question, really just whatever you want to discuss. And then this should all take less than an hour. So if you do need to leave early, we're going to record it and post it to various social forums that we use to keep it inside the ambassador program. And so yeah, I think that covers everything. If you have any questions, just click the little chat bubble at the top middle of your screen, and we'll look out for any questions, but we'll definitely cover everything after Vishal has made it through. So Vishal, you can take it from here.
Yep, thanks, Mason. Yeah, so like Mason mentioned, we're kind of just going to talk about how you can PB your next marathon. We're going to talk a lot about Noon Performance, which we launched a little bit earlier this year, and just kind of going through how to use that in conjunction with other nutrition products. So, yeah, sorry for the little lag on the screen. I guess it's a little technology, but yeah, so as we all know, running a marathon is hard. One thing that you have to note is that you have to both eat and drink. You know, drinking and hydration during longer activities is going to provide the oxygen and fuel to your muscles, and the food and nutrition you can consume is going to give you the energy to continue on and keep moving along. So that's kind of like a general rule of thumb. You know, anything under 90 minutes, you want to just hydrate with electrolyte-rich fluids, such as our electrolytes with caffeine line. When you start going over that hour and a half barrier, you know, carbohydrates are going to start playing a key role, both in fluids and in your nutrition. So in your fluids, it's going to allow you to move the water from your stomach to your working muscles, where it's going to start being used in circulation. And just as a quick reference, note that, you know, drinking 16 to 24 ounces of an electrolyte-rich and carbohydrate-rich fluid an hour for those longer durations is what you want to shoot for. Now, there isn't a you know, set in stone scientific reasoning on or scientific principle, and you need to consume exactly this much amount of fluid. You know, the reason for that is that it's so variable. It's based on gender, fitness intensity level, and, you know, kind of where you're racing and training as well. And another thing, as kind of like a quick reference, just, you know, males need approximately 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrates per hour when you're going for those endurance-based exercises. And women need a little bit less, closer to 30 to 35. Now, that number does not reflect the amount of carbohydrates that you'll find within your fluid. That is just external carbs you want to take in through chews, bars, and other energy sources. So this is a chart that we have on our website that kind of gives you a breakdown on how to use Noon Performance in conjunction with other products to kind of round out your hydration and nutrition needs for longer duration exercise. So as mentioned in the first slide, really up to an hour and a half, you don't need any carbohydrates or any carbohydrate-rich fluid. However, if you're doing a tempo run or you have a hard session on the bike that's under an hour and a half, drinking performance will just kind of aid in that area and delivering that fluid to where it needs to go. Because when you're above that hour and a half, different energy systems are working. So you want your body to adapt to those different energy sources by giving it the precise amount of fluids and nutrition as well. So for men, a kind of a simple calculation you can do to figure out how much fuel you need through food, as in, through chews, bars, gels, or any sort of homemade item is, for males, just take your weight and divide it by 4. And then, I would use that value in a plus or minus about 10 to 15%. As mentioned, that there isn't any prescription dead set science on how much you need to drink per hour. It always comes in ranges, as the individual athlete may need more or less. For women, if you're under 150 pounds, just shoot for 30 grams per hour. Anything above that, you want to take your weight and divide that by 5. And again, that calculation will give you how many carbohydrates you need to consume via food, not the carbohydrates that's in your beverage. Now, for those endurance-based exercises over an hour and a half, we do recommend consuming noon performance. We have designed that product to aid the athlete when they're under the stresses of endurance exercise. So the precise amount of carbohydrates and electrolytes is all you're going to need for hydration for those endurance-based exercises. Your fueling should absolutely come from an external food source, as your body is going to be able to utilize it more efficiently. So, marathons do take longer than 90 minutes. So what should you do? So one thing is that when you're focusing on, marathons or, any sort of workout that exceeds 90 minutes, you wanna kind of switch your hydration from our low calorie electrolyte based product in electrolytes plus caffeine to noon performance, that it has a little bit more carbohydrates in there. So pre-race, about an hour before the race, after you've already eaten and everything, I would begin just slowly sipping on noon performance to kind of top off your fluid, carbs, and electrolyte sources. And then during the race, you want to make sure you are drinking noon performance. You can set a timer if you'd like, just to kind of remind yourself to to drink every 7 to 10 minutes, and try to eat every 12 to 15 minutes after that. But just consuming a sport drink a little bit higher in carbohydrates in that specific blend that we have in noon performance will allow the fluid to get where it needs to go while alleviating GI stress as well. And what we found through our some of our exercise-based research is that during endurance exercise, when you're consuming performance, we found the athlete's rate of dehydration is much, much lower, and their rate of core temperature change is much more stable, which means that the athlete is storing less heat and they're staying more cool, allowing their muscles to fire off at the right level. So fuel sources that you should prepare with performance are, something carbohydrate rich. Using something with multiple carb sources, like a dextrose, sucrose, and fructose, will allow your body not to overload any energy systems that will transfer that food into energy. And how do you calculate to ensure that you're getting the right amount? I would start by using the chart that we had on the previous slide. Anything after that, like tweak as you need to. Go out for a run, use the fueling practice and the hydration practices we've mentioned. If you feel a little tired towards the end of the run, maybe add a little bit more fuel to your nutrition. If you're feeling a little bit bloated or heavy, then you can scale back a little bit. And that's just the reason for that is just how your body is going to process those nutrients during that training session. And as you become more fit or as the environmental conditions potentially change, those need for those nutrients can go up or down. So just be aware of that and keep that plus or 10% buffer when trying to decide how much to eat and drink during the exercise. So should you drink and eat your whole allowance per hour at once, or space it out? You should absolutely space it out. Consuming little bits amounts of food really throughout the day, not even during exercise, will help you maintain your energy levels more efficiently. And consuming, the little bit amount of fluid every 7 to 10 minutes will allow your body to process it more efficiently. If you ever take anything in too much or too little too fast, you're always going to risk that GI distress or stomach issues, which kind of brings me on to that next point. The best strategy to avoid GI distress is to practice, practice, practice. For anyone that's read any of my previous blogs on fueling, it's one of the first things I always say that, the tips that we give you on this webinar and in Noon blogs or any other tips you hear from any other qualified individual, they're only going to go so far unless you actually take those into practice and train your body and train your gut to take in the extra fluid and to take in the extra carbohydrates and energy stores when your body is at stress.
So you're saying for exercise over 90 minutes, you should drink performance in addition to consuming like a goo or a block or a bar.
Absolutely. And I prefer athletes using like a shot block or an energy chew just because it breaks out that carbohydrates a little bit. I get it, gels are super convenient, but what they'll do is they'll pull water away from your muscles and shoot it into your gut to dilute the carbohydrates. And you don't want that. That's going to cause GI distress. If you are going to use a gel, I would highly recommend consuming that gel over a course of about 10 minutes, just taking a little bit at a time. And make sure you wash that down with fluids so it'll help get into your system a little bit faster. So there's a lot of things you can do before the actual race day, and just kind of preparing yourself. So I always tell people the week of the race, add extra salt to your food. Don't go overboard on it, but just add extra salt to your food. That's going to start priming your system to start taking in extra electrolytes. I would, consume Noon electrolytes or vitamins in every other bottle of water that you're consuming. You want to make sure that the fluids that you are taking in have electrolytes so your body will absorb them efficiently. Water alone will not hydrate you to the extent that adding some electrolytes that you'll find in our products will. The day before the race is when you kind of want to begin your preloading hyperhydration strategies. And with that, you want to start dialing back the extra salt on your food because we're going to start focusing on hyperhydration. And so then the night before, what you want to do is you want to add 3 tablets of electrolytes to 16 ounces of water. You can drink that, if you're planning on going to bed around 10 p.m., just drink it around 8 p.m., slowly take it in, allow your body to process all the fluid, and then go to bed. The morning of, as soon as you wake up, dissolve 6 tablets of Noon electrolytes into 16 ounces of water. You want a minimum of 2,000 milligrams of sodium citrate because that will trigger mechanisms in your brain and your body to hold on to salt and to start having the fluid continue circulating within your blood. So then those nutrients are readily available. And you want to drink that over the course of an hour to an hour and a half. So slowly sip that. And about an hour to 2 hours before, begin sipping Noon Performance. Now, I'll mention the hyperhydration part of it. It's not for everyone. You should honestly only consume it really when your training sessions are going to take you above that 2.5 to 3 hour session. Or if you're an extremely heavy sweater, and or if you're competing in a hot or humid environment. That's just going to allow you to compensate a little bit more for the electrolyte and the fluid losses you'll see during exercise. by storing those fluid and electrolytes in and keeping them circulated with your blood, so then your muscles can use them more effectively.
And so, Vishal, you also posted a blog recently on the Young blog that goes into more detail.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So if you want to read up more on it, the most previous blog we've written goes into the science and exactly how you do it. And Mason just posted a link on the chat too if you need a little refresher. So here's some, what we like to do at the end is Mason always tries to pull some questions from the audience, and then we like to take them as sports nutrition myths or things that, our consumers have heard, and ways that we can kind of combat that to help you further achieve your next PB. So I feel like I'm a salty sweater. Should I use salt tabs? No, you should not. If you're hydrating with performance and you have electrolytes and carbohydrates within your fluids, you have everything in your power electrolyte-wise and for hydration-wise right there in the mix. If you notice that you're losing a lot of salt in your sweat, then your just sodium intake in your food and nutrition is a little bit too high, so you can dial back on that. That's kind of why I always tell people to add that a little bit of extra salt leading up to it, so then everything's just going to be a little bit more available, and that hyperhydration aspect of it will kind of take away some of that excessive electrolyte losses you'll see in sweat. So do you need any additional electrolytes during exercise? Not if you're consuming a beverage that has everything in the precise ratios like we do in doing performance. And note that when you're taking in food as your fueling source, you're going to get some electrolytes in there as well. So don't worry all that much about it. What's the best way to stimulate kind of a race environment to practice my nutrition plan? So for me, I always advise athletes to do everything that you would do on race day on your long runs and your long tempo or harder efforts, even if they're only going to take about an hour. Practice the fueling that you would do during the race day just because you need to start beginning to train your body. One thing I always look at is know where you're racing and know the course. Study the course to figure out if you need to train more on hills and things like that. And then know the environment in which you're racing in. So we're here in Seattle. If we were, going to gear up for a race in Texas in February, we would be putting on layers just to try to increase our core temperature to try to match what we would see during race day. So during an endurance event, can I stop consuming fuel hydration 30 minutes from the finish, 1 hour from the finish, or ever? So I always say no. A lot of times you want to just continue on your fueling strategy until you get to the race. If you're within the last 30 minutes of the race and you're not sure whether or not to consume any fuel or any hydration, definitely top off the fluids. And if you're going to go on fueling for that last 30 minutes, adding a little bit of caffeine into that fuel will give you that extra boost. When Mason and I were talking about yesterday, he's like, does that change in the start of a race or a run? And I'm like, no, the first hour of exercise, your body's going to be under the least amount of stress, specifically your intestines. So you want to make sure that you're taking in fluids and nutrition early and often when your body is the least amount of stress. So in the latter parts of the race, you have those carbohydrates readily available to be used. Now, if you're racing for 2 hours, should my fuel be different than if I'm racing for 5+ hours? So yes, it should. Normally, what I recommend for ultra distance events, 5+ hours, your Ironmans, your ultra runners, your long distance cyclists, is that you start incorporating fat into your fueling. So don't just start, taking nut butters and things like that during a 5-hour run or a 5-hour race, 5+ hour race. Make sure that you're practicing that in fueling, because you need to start training your body to adequately utilize that fat, which is much slower burning which is going to be much more beneficial for you in the long run when you're not using as many as carbohydrates as fuel. So anything really ultra distance above 5+ hour, I would start incorporating a little bit more fat into fueling, but make sure you begin training on that so your body can naturally make the switch on its own. So carrying my own nutrition is hard. What are some tips to make it easier? So I get it, it's hard, but there are a lot of ways that you can try to ease that carrying everything on. You know, there's really nice hydration vests and belts now. There's handhelds that have pockets in them that you can stash gels or chews or something like that. One thing I always tell when people say that, oh, it's too hard to carry a water bottle, or it's too much to stash a gel in my shorts or something. I'm like, well, do it anyway, because it's gonna help you. We know it's gonna help you, and you're much better off being slightly uncomfortable holding a water bottle during a race than running a marathon completely dehydrated and bonked the whole way. So as we talked about earlier, you know, with performance, some of the races where performance is going to be on course this year is at the Long Beach Marathon, at CIM, San Francisco, and in 2018, yeah, and the Austin Marathon as well. So that covers it for the content area. So we'll kind of stay on board to answer any questions. It looks like we've got a couple, so we'll kind of go through that now. And feel free to keep asking along via the chat.
Yeah, so we've got a question from Jim. Do you recommend practicing hyperhydration in some form during training just to make sure it doesn't lead to GI distress, assuming one has been training / practicing with normal noon hydration and other carb food sources?
Yeah, so I always, that's a great question, Jim. So I always recommend practicing it. The first time you ever hyperhydrate, just do the half strength. So the night before, do 3 tabs. The morning of, do the same half strength, 3 tabs. Just allow your body to get used to it. If you're readily consuming noon throughout the day and things like that, your body's already used to it. But that's why I still want them to try the half strength, go out for your long run. If you don't notice any issues, where we won't suspect any, but you just never know, then you can kind of start weaning your body onto a full strength hyperhydration.
Sweet. And we've got another question from Bree. Is there any harm in mixing noon performance a day or two prior to marathon morning? Does anything break down prior to mixing early? No,
you can do it and just keep it cool. We do use real fruit juice powders, and you know, once you rehydrate them and you refrigerate them for an extended period of time, like over 2 days, the flavor might start degrading a little bit, just because it's trying to disperse. So just be aware of that, but nutritionally and the way that the product is working, you know, as long as it's refrigerated, we'll be perfectly fine.
Sweet. We've got a question from Rob about cold weather events. I tend to not drink as much. Should I be trying to force water or up the carb drink mix? Sorry.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily up the water. I would take in the carb drink mix, so in performance. You know, I hear that all the time. You know, it's winter, I don't feel like I'm sweating enough, I don't want to drink as much. And to some degree that's true, but you're not only losing water through sweat, you know, you're losing it breathing. And when you're running and breathing or exercise and breathing, you're losing even more water. In the wintertime, most athletes wear clothing that keeps their core temperature warm. And then what that's going to do is, yes, it's going to keep your skin warm, but it's going to raise your internal temperature high enough so hydration will really help mitigate that core temperature rise, which we mentioned earlier that some of the studies that we performed on performance showed that that raise in core temperature is much lower when using performance. So the athlete is efficiently regulating their body temperature with the proper hydration. And to mention, we conducted those studies in a heat and altitude chamber. So not only were the athletes exercising at tempo level, but they were also under even more stress in a heat and altitude chamber.
Sweet. So I have a question about the salty sweater side of things. Is it bad at all to be a salty sweater?
Not really, no. It's not. You know, the reason I like that question is because one of the biggest myths I hear from any athlete I work with is they actually think the composition of their sweat matters. There is no scientific study or any study that points to the direction that what you lose in your sweat actually matters for hydration. So what we want to look at is we want to look at the new roles of electrolytes. So electrolytes are playing the role of moving fluid from your stomach to your muscles so your body can move a little bit more efficiently. Some people are just saltier sweaters where they, you know, their daily intake of salt is a little bit high, so then they're going to lose a little bit more salt. You're not born a salty sweater. You become a salty sweater by consuming too much salt, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for athletes. It's an inconvenience, but again, there's no scientific studies that are proving that losing a lot of salt in your sweat actually matters for hydration, because like I mentioned, when you're using the right hydration products that have the right carb electrolyte ratio, that's going to take care of hydration.
Cool. Sweet. So we have a question from Jody, which is how many blocks or chews per hour during a race? One every 12 to 15 minutes. So this asks both like quantity, probably in terms of grams or calories, as well as the frequency.
Yeah, so you know, the quantity varies slightly. Normally you want to try to consume probably like 3 to 6 chews an hour. You know, women can stay on the lower end, men can kind of go a little bit on the higher end. I do recommend drinking every 7 to 10 minutes and eating every 12 to 15 minutes. So, you know, you can kind of do the math, and if you want to take in more than 3 chews, go a little bit on the 12 side. If you're not, you can go a little bit on the higher side. So it's just important that you're giving your body, as you're expending energy running, as you're losing fluids, as your body is using its natural energy stores, you just want to make sure you're replacing that. And you want to make sure that you're replacing it in a consistent fashion, so then you don't bump the last 6 miles of a marathon, and then that you can run through the finish line feeling good and feeling accomplished.
And can we skip back to the slide that we have on our website, the performance one, or the fueling one? So if you look at the columns there, there's some formulas for it. We want to figure out how much grams of carbohydrates, so grams of blocks, basically, we would want to consume per hour.
Yeah, and I believe within the shot blocks, there's about, I think, like 3 to 4, maybe 3 grams of carbs. So yeah, if you want to kind of dial in that value, you can use this chart. But again, use it as a guideline, and use it as a starting point. See what the number spits out, compare that to what you're doing right now, and then make the adjustments. And always monitor how your body is not only feeling during the run, but how you're recovering after and the day after.
And so you also set as a starting point for frequency. Can you remind us what that is?
So for hydration, I would consume fluids every about 7 to 10 minutes. And then food for fueling every 12 to 15.
And those are overlapping?
Yeah, those will overlap. And you want it to overlap because you want a little bit of fluid to help take down the food as well.
Nice, wash it down.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got one from Kate. I see so many of these recovery water beverages on the market now. They claim to be pH balanced, contain electrolytes, etc. Any value to using these as a base for noon?
I mean, you could add it to those type of waters, but here's the thing with a lot of those pH waters, that they claim that the water the water is more basic, so it's not as neutral as plain tap water. It's got a pH slightly higher, and the theory on that is that when the water goes through your stomach and it mixes in with the enzymes in your stomach, it's going to come out neutral. Well, that's not actually true. Any beverage or any fluid that you consume that goes through your stomach is going to enter is going to exit your stomach and go into circulation slightly acidic. The nature of your stomach, regardless of if you're a plant-based athlete or however you're eating or nutrition patterns, is going to be acidic. And it's going to be too powerful for any sort of buffer to kind of mitigate that. So for those type of beverages, I look at it and I'm like, you know, it's not necessarily pH of the fluid is not really that important. Gastric pH, which is the pH of your stomach, is actually more important, and you can get that more neutral by eating a more plant-based diet. But however, taking in fluids or drinks that have a high pH, it's not going to do what it says it's going to do once it mixes with everything else that's in your stomach. The electrolytes in there are great, and you know, you always want to kind of look for hydration products with electrolytes, especially in recovery, because it's just going to help pull the water back to your muscles.
So is that what people, even if they were drinking noon, for example, would be doing like post-marathon? Drink some noon?
Yeah.
Drink the beer right away? What do we do?
No, so I would focus on rehydrating first. You know, I know the beer is really tempting, but really just give your body what it needs to be, what it needs to replace from everything you've kind of expended during the exercise. So the first half hour, you know, just slowly rehydrate, get some food in your stomach, and then you can go nuts, have a beer, celebrate the victory, celebrate the run, etc. But if you want to recover and you want to feel good the next day, make sure you take care of the little hydration nutrition. Now, if it's a big race that you've been training for all year and you're planning on taking a couple months off after, then have at it. I mean, I don't think you're going to care too much about how you feel the next day. But if you're trying to gear up for another session or shakeout run the next day, just focus on hydration first, then refuel and repair.
Awesome. That's a good tip. I'll try it.
Yeah, let's try it.
I'll try that out. So if we have any more questions, just open the chat bubble there at the top middle and type it in. We'll stay open for another minute or two. If we don't get anything else, we'll sign off. Thanks though everyone for coming out and joining the webinar. I think I learned probably as much as anyone else because this is all really great information. So thank you, Vishal, for sharing.
Yep. Absolutely.
We've got the webinar recorded, so if you want to revisit the webinar, use any of the information for planning your nutrition plan for your next endurance run, bike, marathon, anything like that. Sweet, Jim eats the burger about an hour after the finish.
Yeah. I knew you'd know.
Definitely drink some noon before the burger, but cool. So I think we're all set. Thanks again for coming out. Vishal, do you have any last words for us?
Nope. Happy hydrating. Keep your eye out for more blogs and things like that over the course of the fall to help you fuel and recover.
Awesome.
Yep. Bye. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.